Transport's Statement of Intent 2023 to 2026. So we'll call up Claire and Alistair to introduce this item, and there's some recommendations up there which I'm happy to move, and Councillor Fletcher will second. So over to you, Claire.
Thank you. So the report you have before you is to approve Auckland Transport Statement of Intent for 2023 to 2026 period. This marks the end of quite a long process that started in December last year with the letter of expectation to AT. The draft Statement of Intent was received in April, and you as shareholders provided your feedback on the 18th of May at the Transport and Infrastructure Committee. We've reviewed the final Statement of Intent against the shareholders' feedback, and a reconciliation table is provided in Appendix B of the report. Auckland Transport has responded positively to shareholder feedback and addressed the matters raised in our letter to them. And staff from Auckland Transport and Council have been working together importantly to refine the key performance indicators and outcomes expected. A summary of all the measures is now provided on page 29 of the Statement of Intent, and Appendix 2, importantly, provides a lot more detail and explanation around each measure and the rationale for those targets. It is important to note that the targets included for a number of the measures have been revised down to reflect the budget and the priorities that have been discussed earlier today at the committee. And the Auckland Transport the board has made a conscious decision to focus on what is achievable in its targets as opposed to what are setting stretch targets. There is one target where there has been a bit of debate, and that is the one around passenger transport boardings, which in the SOI is currently noted at 83.4 million. And AT have noted that they are also reporting against the aspirational target of 100 million regularly, and indeed that goes out in an email to councillors every week. Auckland Transport are also working with council staff on the passenger transport recovery plan, and as you'll see up there, there is an additional chair's recommendation that says once that plan is approved, it would be prudent to come back and look at whether we need to update and amend the SOI to align with the targets in that plan. There are two other areas where we are suggesting that Auckland Transport comes back to the committee. The first one is around the capital program, as there has been discussions earlier today. Auckland Transport, in light of some of the budget decisions, do have some concerns around awarding multi-year contracts, and we understand that they are doing further prioritisation work. We are suggesting that they come back to us in September on the outcomes of that process, and they include what are funded and not funded, so that Council has visibility over that. In conclusion, we are recommending that staff approve that shareholders approve the Statement of Intent, and should you agree to that today, we will write to Auckland Transport confirming the approval and noting the additional request for them to come back. There is one other matter in the report where we have suggested that Auckland Transport do come back, and that is around the work that they are doing on stormwater, and they are discussing that with their board later this year. So that concludes what I'd like to say, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Claire. And you will note, of course, in that attachment there's quite some level of detail informing the agenda paper itself. So with that said, open up for questions, and first is Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. This might be a question for yourself, Chair. If you're not comfortable with the deaths and serious injuries being revised downward, how would you kind of suggest that I express that with my vote today?
That's a good question. It might well go to other aspects of the Statement of Intent. So I think Claire and Alistair, it would probably be helpful for us to get some sense of how we've arrived at these figures, and how plausible is alterations at this stage, given the process we've been through and the extent of the engagement with Auckland Transport over it, basically.
So I think it's important to understand, and it is why we highlighted it at this, that Auckland Transport have revised down the figures in response to the budget and also in response to a number of other factors on safety. I'm aware that there might be people from Auckland Transport that are probably better able to speak to in more technical detail around that. In terms of the process from here, there are two options as I see it, and Alistair might want to jump in. The first one is that we can write back to Auckland Transport and say we would like to have further discussion around these targets and develop a process around that. The second one is that we do not accept this SOI and we would be looking to a modification process. That does require us to consult with Auckland Transport in the first instance before we could make a modification shareholding resolution.
So I guess, Councillor Henderson, to answer your question, that no, there is a possibility for change here, but it would involve that process, and I guess it depends to a large extent on our willingness to accept the information that's gone into informing these targets here.
Yeah, and the desire of the meeting, of course. Thanks, Chair. Okay,
Councillor Dalton.
I think mine's a comment. I'll wait. Thank you.
So Councillor Dalton's a comment. Do we have any other questions? Okay, so that's the recommendations that are up there. We're happy to go to the speaking order.
Look, I'm just trying to find it, but I think in the SOI it does refer to the bus driver shortage. Here it is, the current bus driver shortage. It's on page 13. That's redundant, that line now, so if we can, because there is no current bus driver shortage. Am I correct in that regard? I think it's 13.
All right, thanks, Councillor Darby. I'm going through that. I think that's what we heard this morning, wasn't it? So that's fair enough.
Another question, if I may. I think we're all concerned about the new setting on safety. Safety we talk about as being paramount. And just following up on Councillor Henderson's concern that he's just expressed, is for you, Barry, is there a way to have a D that notes in particular the new setting for that draws our attention to it and requires us to come back to that, you know, as a priority. We often talk about safety as being paramount in transport. I don't think any of us want to shy away from that. We've got a situation here, we've got a financial constraint. I'm looking for your guidance, Barry, on how we might do that in a meaningful way. I'm not suggesting we just pack it out with a cosy looking motion.
I'm not quite sure how we can respond to that or how to do that because it does tie in with the funding that's available and the budgets available for Auckland Transport, I would think. So that's something we can pick up with them and come back to you on that. I'm not sure if Alistair may have some comment on it, but I think these are tied into the funding available, so we start playing around with one measure, they change.
Yeah. Through the chair, look, the statement of intent does state that the reset of the target reflects less funding being available than anticipated in the Road to Zero trajectory. So I'm reluctant at this stage to make formal changes to a statement of intent without understanding fully the relationship between the budget and the target. I would suggest if this is an issue of of serious concern, that it's picked up probably through the LTP process. Sorry, we've got Auckland Transport people who are cleverer than me sitting behind me who might be able to weigh in on this too. But fundamentally, if it's a funding issue. There were a number of trade-offs made in the annual plan process just gone, and if this is a result of that, then perhaps the best course of action is to pick it up through the LTP process.
Perhaps, Stacey, you could add to Alistair's response there.
Thank you, Chair. And look, it's a good idea in terms of picking it up in the LTP process. I just want to point out that we did not meet our target last year as well. And we're so far off it in terms of that, and knowing that we have funding constraints, it's irresponsible for us to keep on putting out these targets that we knowingly can't meet. And that's why we re-baselined it and take into consideration our current 12 months to date. We're looking at 669 deaths and serious injuries. The target is less than that. You know, ESI target is an improvement upon that number. So we're still aiming for year-on-year improvement, but it's really important to understand what we set for our people based on that. So a couple of points. The cost to deliver has scaled obviously from 20 to 40% post-COVID. Now this in terms of the SOI target has been set quite a while back, and in terms of how it flowed through the last few years, and it hasn't changed off that methodology. So that's an important consideration. And, you know, beyond that constraint, the funding proposed for FY24 RLTP road safety has been reduced substantially, 30 million from 74 million. So there's big changes there. I do want to stress that also it's not just the capital side. There was a number of other what I call policy legislative decisions that assumed when those targets were initially set that have not materialised. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Stacey. I think that's quite helpful. Is there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Henderson and Councillor Hills. Okay, thank you. Councillor Hills?
Just on the measure, the 24 minutes, I've lost it now, it's a new measure. I feel like if we can't fund the DSI reductions to where we thought, how are we funding a 24-minute, where is it? Sorry. The average travel time across the arterial network. I don't quite understand how that's, and is that in a vehicle or as a person?
Through the chair, on page 37 of 80's statement of intent, they do give a bit more detail around how that measure is calculated. So it's the average travel speed of people in cars and buses in the AM peak hour, and uses the average trip in Auckland, which is 10 kilometres for the purpose of this calculation. So it does take into account the works and the improvements that they are making as part of the passenger transport recovery plan, I'm assuming, and some of the other initiatives that have been involved.
Okay.
But we believe that's funded.
That is our understanding from the statement of intent. We could go back and ask further clarification around that.
No more questions. It's been moved and seconded. We have a speaking order, starting with Councillor Dalton and Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. I really struggle with the DSI as well, and I understand the reasons for it. But at the end of the day, we're the ones that set the budget. And to approve an SOI that has a DSI that's going to say no more than 640 when it's no more than 537 now is not something I'm going to support. And this is no reflection on Auckland Transport. This is a reflection on us and what we choose to invest and what we choose as our priorities. The emission reductions are also, the target has been dropped from 17% to 15% in the next year. Unacceptable. Not by Auckland Transport again, but by us. We must have a look at ourselves and what we choose to invest into our people of Auckland and our priorities, and what we are going to decide is the future for our city. The future for our city is to be a safe network for people who are driving, cycling, walking, any mode of travel that they choose to take. To have a target in there because funding has been reduced to say that there will be an increase of no more than over, 110 people is not something I can support. So I will be voting against this because from my perspective, I made the decision on the funding and these are the outcomes that Auckland Transport has rebalanced their targets to, and I can't support that for this particular area. DSI and emissions. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dalton. Councillor Henderson?
Thanks, Chair. I was really glad to follow Councillor Dalton's wisdom because I think you're absolutely dead on, Councillor. Look, I'm wrestling with this in my gut because I really don't want to vote against this. Statement of intent's a pretty big deal, and an even bigger deal, I think, to vote something down. But at the same time, look, I just cannot go along with revising down the DSI targets. It's just too much. And, you know, I note in the report, it says that they have been realigned in response to funding requirements. And I think that's part of the picture. And we got I think the main part of the picture through questioning. And I just want to acknowledge the answers to that is that these are policy discussions. Some of these are regulatory issues that actually council are lobbying government for changes. And I think we're going some way to that today. So it's not just money, right? Where we look at to invest our money is a big part of it, but it's also some other work that needs to be done as well. And so look, to revise down DSI targets sends a really bad message to Aucklanders, in my opinion, and I just cannot go along with that. We have had too many deaths, particularly of cyclists, particularly of walkers. We've all had them in our wards. We've all had to speak to families that have been affected. You know, we can't go along with that. We've got to put a stake in the ground and say, look, we're going to do what we can to invest what we can, particularly in terms of rhetoric around separated cycle paths and things of that nature. Speed tables, you know, we have this horrible political rhetoric about opposing things that make things safer for kids around schools. That's not the message that I want to send Aucklanders, so unfortunately I'm going to have to vote it down. Sorry, Chair.
Okay, Mayor Brown?
Thanks for that. We have made considerable progress, and I think that this is a good step forward. This statement of intent, Pressure has already got rid of the bus drivers problem. It's quite difficult for an independent body to actually deliver on statements of road accidents because the people themselves have an involvement in that. But it was interesting to notice in today's government policy statement, which I'm welcoming because it's quite supportive of where we want to go. One of the things that they've agreed to is refocusing the safety budget, which provides Auckland with more flexibility on delivering sensible safety improvements as part of the broader improvement and renewal project. So we are getting more flexibility. It's very rigid, the way it's delivered. I think the intention is definitely to reduce the numbers, and perhaps picking a number is what's the problem. We should be setting about things to make it safer, but the government are allowing us the ability to be a bit more flexible about how we go about it, and I think that's a good thing. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Brown. Councillor Newman?
Reading the draft GPS today, Mr. Chair. The safety budget. You know how much that's been cut? 37%. 37% in the government policy statement on land transport. That is the adjustment downwards in the safety budget. Previously called Road to Zero, down 37%. You want to go and talk to some? Don't talk to me. You can talk to me. I'll listen to you. I'm not sure David Parker's listening to you. But it's not just about the GPS. This has been going on for years, Mr. Chair. I mean, I text me this morning. I don't know where to feel angry with Auckland Transport or frustrated with Auckland Transport. We have cut growth projects that are actually designed to ensure the safe and efficient operation of the transport network accommodating growth. We have cut safety projects for intersections as part of our let's package up all the funding to address growth and safety in greenfields because we're going to plough it all into an MOU for Kāinga Ora, signed up by most people around here. We've had the road resealing targets have not been met year after year after year. Why not? Because they haven't been funded. And of course, they need part funding from government. That hasn't been matched. And now, of course, we've got a GPS that wants to reduce the safety budget by 37%. I'm not sure if that's going to end up on some people's Twitter feeds, but that's the reality of the document. Go and read it on the Ministry of Transport website. This has been workshopped and workshopped and workshopped, and I'm sorry that it doesn't suit the narrative for some people. I don't think that anybody voting to adopt this statement of intent today is out there to go and drive up the number of deaths and serious injuries. And if that's the narrative from some, well, I'd be disappointed. That they need a statement of intent, and I didn't see in the budget that we passed at the end of June too many amendments to drive up the CapEx budget and the renewals budget for Auckland Transport. I saw a lot of speeches and rhetoric about a number of things. I didn't see the funding amendments go up for Auckland Transport. This is our statement of intent and it's our budget. So people want to go and redress this next year, they can. I bet you anything that it still won't be enough because this is a complex and difficult debate, Chair, but you have to try and strike the balance. And I think that the balance is not perfect. I'm not happy with the statement of intent, but it's better than what it was. And I look forward to seeing Auckland Transport moving in the right direction in terms of meeting that slightly tougher target around road resealing, because you know what, 5.5% has been atrocious. They're at 4.6 against that target last year. 6%, 6.5%, 7%, that is going to need a huge increase in funding, and I wonder where that's going to come from. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Lee.
Thank you. Statements of intent are part of the Council and AT's annual routine. Frankly, and they're a legal requirement, but frankly, in practice, I don't see that they add too much value. I don't think, in terms of this document, which is a big one, whether the average public transport user or the average driver will get that much value out of it. And I don't know how these things are costed, and perhaps I don't think I want to know. But just in terms of the metrics, I think the metrics could be very helpful, good metrics, helpful for the shareholder, but also helpful for AT, the Board of AT and management and staff of AT. And I'm not sure whether we've achieved that. We could do a lot better in benchmarking, for instance, to see how we are progressing. Given our budget commitment to AT and the proportion of the budget that we dedicate to transport, some of the reporting, the informal reporting councillors get back from AT, I find is somewhat misleading, somewhat over-optimistic in terms of public transport patronage. For instance, Mr. Kimpton in his PowerPoint earlier this morning gave us the figure of 71 million passenger trips per annum. AT's patronage data actually is good and robust in the raw data. So 71 million is about 70% of where we were in Auckland in 2019 prior to COVID. So we are a long way back from recovering from COVID. And so I wonder how much blame we can put on COVID so many years after the pandemic. And I think we therefore need to ask some searching questions about our basic performance given the budgetary commitment. I notice in regard to cycling counts, for instance, they've been reset, and the annual increase has been reset to 2.5%. I think that is very optimistic to me, Frank. But what I'm concerned about that is the comment, this reflects budget reductions. No, I don't think so. I think that's a little bit misleading. If we measure everything by budget, I think we would have a completely different perspective on virtually everything. If you go on to the motorway right now, you'll be amazed how crowded and congested it is in comparison, in particular, to what we have to spend a lot of money on, public transport, cycleways and so on. So, and just one more point, there's a lot of emphasis on Maori outcomes. And okay, that's an expectation and a requirement. But I think we need to be very careful when we are requiring AT to spend money on Maori businesses. I think that may clash with other legal requirements in terms of discrimination, and also put a lot of pressure on AT to ascertain whether the recipient of such businesses are valid claimants. I just think it's just another unhelpful requirement, overly prescriptive in terms of Maori outcomes, because Maori in Auckland, like everyone else, should and deserves to get a better transport system given the money that Maori and everyone else are paying for it. So I think the council should be a little bit more careful about putting obligations on AT to send money in certain directions, regardless of the rigour and value for money and so on. So coming back to the statement of intent, I have to say overall that it's somewhat underwhelming, and for the average Aucklander, public transport user in particular, but driver or anyone else, it will be something of a non-event. And I think we really, over the coming year, need to, from Auckland Council's point of view, up our game in this particular respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, yeah, I can't support it for the reasons that have been mentioned as well around safety, DSI. I agree with Daniel Newman. I am really disappointed. I have not had a chance to read the GPS, but if that's cuts to transport, that's the same issue we're having with our capped out renewals funding from the government too. You know, it has been exciting to see significant increases from ATAP. I think 2017 we're at 26 billion with a $6 billion hole, and then it went up to 32 billion 2021, but we're actually yet to see a lot of that money come in. So the promises are great, but I've got concerns on where we're going, and it is government's problem as well. So 100% agree there. So I am concerned about the lack of rollout of some of those big projects and some of the funding that has been promised to us that we've never received. Obviously, pandemic has a big effect on those budgets, but there are a lack of, I think, focus on getting those budgets to us. But once again, I guess same with the TERP and the transport emissions. We've been giving this feedback for 4 years now, and I still am none the wiser on exactly what is needed. So we get told there is not enough budget, or we can't do that because it's too, you know, Vision Zero, and same with our emissions requirements are too ambitious, but I still haven't had a plan or advice to us what could be needed or what we need to focus on. And again, I don't believe that all the projects that come across my email and that I see consulted on have all the safety and climate focus they could within the budgets of those projects. And often there is good support from community for certain things, and that doesn't get added. And then there's also a case, and I keep asking whose responsibility is it, the AT board or us from a governance perspective, when we stop projects, or when AT stops projects after, even if the submissions were in favour, that a few loud voices or a local board or a councillor stops a project, who's at fault if there is a death or serious injury then? Because there has been a lot of projects stopped from interference without actually thinking about what that might lead to from a deaths and serious injuries perspective. So I do have concerns about that, so I cannot support this. Thank you.
Councillor Ferry?
Thank you. I wasn't going to say anything on this one. I was going to listen, and I feel quite torn over the DSI stuff, but I did want to point out when it comes to the GPS funding, and I've just read a Herald article while Councillor Newman was talking. Yes, there is a 37% decrease in safety. That's because that money and some more has been shifted to the state highway improvements and the local road improvements budgets, and that is clearly outlined in the double asterisks point that is next to the previously called Road to Zero line in their article. So they haven't actually reduced the funding, they've shifted it to other lines which have in fact increased by more. So I just wanted to put that to rest. The key thing for me about that I can't get over about the DSIs, deaths, serious injuries, not just an acronym, is that actually I don't think we're quite making the connection here between what we do and what we ask AT to do and what results in deaths and serious injuries. I think a lot of us might be thinking, actually it's about how much road engineering we can afford. But actually the safest form of transport that has the lowest level of deaths and serious injuries is public transport. So if we are investing in increasing patronage on public transport, we will decrease DSIs. If we are focused on increasing the number of kids who can cycle and walk safely to school, we will reduce DSIs. So when we say we don't have the budget to reduce DSIs, are we really saying we don't have the budget to increase patronage on PT, to make it safer for kids to walk and cycle to school, to do all those other things that do reduce DSIs? And I don't think it's okay for us to accept a statement of intent that doesn't lay that widow, that challenge down clearly. There's a range of things we could be doing to reduce DSI. Let's look at all of them and say to AT, we want to pull all of those levers. And some of it won't look like safety funding. Some of it will look like travel-wise. Some of it will look like a bike train. You know, some of it will look like ferry improvements. And that's okay. The target is to reduce deaths and serious injuries, and we shouldn't lose that target. Thank you.
Councillor Baker?
Yeah, obviously I'm going to support the SOI, but look, it worries me that we're hinging this whole SOI on DSIs, and we heard and really good points, Julie, about the public transport, and I recall the statement of the CEO this morning talking about the majority of the funding going towards public transport. We're not going to fix that overnight. And we just have to be realistic about that. But to throw the SOI out because we're worried about the target, I also recall Stacey sitting here a few months ago talking to us about why and what is killing people on the road, and the huge statistic of people not putting on their seatbelt. How that can be addressed in an SOI, how Auckland Transport can address that, I don't know. And so I think we need to be really, really careful here. Yes, make great statements about, how we want to reduce DSIs. DSIs go up and down every year without rhyme or reason. And it's almost impossible, having been involved in that industry for a long time, it is an impossible science to try and figure out why people are dying on our roads or getting seriously injured. And we have to be really careful in terms of how and what we do in this regard, in terms of this SOI. And I think if you believe that the target is going to drive Auckland Transport to think seriously about reducing DSI, and that's the only thing, you are so mistaken and so misled, and it's almost, disrespectful to the people at Auckland Transport that work incredibly hard to make people safe within our network. So, you know, I will be supporting it, and, you know, let's not get carried away in terms of the DSI stuff and our statements on them.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Baker. Final comment, Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to support the comments being made by Councillor Dalton that I won't be supporting this either, because the target should be to reduce DSIs, but the target is not that in the SOI. And if I look at my particular area, which Councillor Hills mentioned, Royal Oak, and the loss there of Levi, and the identified measures to make it safer not being implemented, you know, reducing this target means they are still at risk. So I don't want to see any reduction of DSI, because it will happen to vulnerable users, which are the cyclists and the walkers, and then the identified areas where we've already had loss of life. And then you look at the Qatar and the projects that have fallen off there, being the 3 kilometres in Royal Oak and Onehunga of safe cycling facilities. So it's not something I can support, and also regarding the emissions reduction. So I've already lost 5 people in my ward who were cycling and didn't come home. So I can't see my support for anything that means this will continue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just exercise my right of reply now as a mover. I guess the first point I'd like to make is we've been through a pretty exhaustive process here, folks, in terms of workshops and backwards and forwards to AT. So there has been ample opportunity leading up to the 11th hour to address matters such as this that haven't really been taken advantage of, but that's obviously that's the prerogative of councillors to do that. I guess the thing that's foremost in my mind coming to this vote is really what has this statement of intent endeavoured to do, and notwithstanding some of the valid comments on the limitations of the statement of intent and in terms of what gets rolled out in reality, is pretty well encapsulated by the Chair's forward, in which he says, "Our direction is clear. Aucklanders expect a fundamental change in our approach. We have heard that and we will change. That is why it is critical that we understand the complex and differing needs of the communities we serve and how people live their lives. We haven't always got this right. At times we have focused too much on getting the job done and not enough on the people whose lives or businesses we impact." He goes on and elaborates on that view. So essentially by voting against the statement of intent, you're fundamentally voting against a statement that is endeavoured to bring about the change in the way that Auckland Transport have responded to our statement, which just seems staggering to me. So a genuine and real effort has been made to respond to our direction, and they have done that over the statement of intent as a whole. Yet at the last thing, we face the prospect, as is people's right, to vote the whole thing down. I find that a little hard to understand. As far as the matter itself goes, and deaths and serious injuries certainly doesn't become much more serious than that, but I would just repeat the explanatory note that Stacey gave to us when she spoke, and that was in respect of the targets that people are upset about have been reset from the baseline result of 665 deaths. So that's what actually happened on the ground, 665 deaths and serious injuries in the 12 months to June 2023. The target trajectory is calculated from that baseline result, and that is going down. That is going down from what the reality on the ground was, 665 deaths. The target for this year, no more than 640. Target the following year, no more than 616, no more than 591. So it is actually going down. So let's get that clear. And the baseline is based on what actually happened. I'm not quite sure what other baseline is most relevant here than the actual deaths we're dealing with, deaths and serious injuries that we're dealing with. Certainly my experience over many years looking at deaths and serious injuries is that quite often they go up and down, and quite often irrespective of investment into the safety measures or campaigns. So you get some quite perverse results where there's a huge blitz on certain areas and the death rates or the death and serious injuries actually go up. So this is not a straightforward matter of just of targets, as if targets in themselves determine the outcome. That's not the way deaths and serious injuries work out. But I do repeat, the salient point here is the targets are going down and they are based on real-time, real-life experience of this year. I think that's reasonable. I think that's a reasonable starting point. So if people want to maintain the notion that somehow a target in itself will bring about the change, or that target is not one of actually reduction, well, then that's over to them. So I guess finally I'll just say that this is an important matter that a lot of work's gone in, that we've been involved with in one form or another over quite a significant period of time. Auckland Transport have endeavoured to respond in a genuine fashion. I think it would be highly inappropriate for that response then to be voted down or rejected at the last moment. Thank you. So we have the... Okay, I've had a call for a division. The recommendations are up on the screen in front of you. I'll leave that to Duncan to conduct and Sam to conduct then.
Thank you, Chair. Members, you are voting on clauses A to C. Councillor Watson.
For.
Councillor Baker.
For.
Councillor Bartley.
Against.
Mayor Brown. For. Councillor Dalton.
Against.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Ferry.
Against.
Councillor Filipina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Foley.
For.
Councillor Henderson.
Against.
Councillor Hills.
Against.
Councillor Lee.
Aye.
Councillor Leone.
Against.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Member Renata. Councillor Sayers.
For.
Deputy Mayor Simpson. Councillor Stewart. Councillor Turner.
For.
Councillor Walker. Councillor Walker. Councillor Williamson.
Okay, that's the numbers in, Duncan?
That is carried 14 votes to 6.
Okay, thank you, everyone, for that item. So we go to item 11,